Dr. Dana Tassone with participants in HFT 6228, a graduate course in hospitality and tourism management, discussing Chapter 10. Chapter 10, Employee Retention. Employee retention. Employee retention is an outcome by definition. And that outcome is achieved, as is the case with all outcomes, is achieved through a process. And the process is professional management. So if we backtrack, because everything builds on everything else, we talked in Chapter 4, I believe, about employee retention, or about employee rights, and in their relationship with the employer. And in that chapter, we started to argue for professional management. And then we progressed into chapter, I think 7, maybe 8, that talked about employee recruitment and selection, and identified that the quality of that process, those processes, result in the selection of quality employees, quality staff members. And then in the next chapter, we talked about training and the job of a training manager, and identified that person is an individual who is a skilled educator, a skilled learning psychology person, and a skilled problem-solving diagnostician. And now we move into, so we start with, okay, we create an environment, we attract quality people, we train the quality people, and now we must retain quality people. And this domain falls within two categories of an HR practitioner. One would be, and we talk extensively about, and it's a very dry topic in my opinion, but very straightforward, is the compensation manager, compensation administrator. And what does the compensation administrator do? He or she is responsible for developing and executing a strategy for wages, salaries, and benefits. And this type of person is in my experience, this type of person is really an accountant. That's the skill of this person is detail work, numbers work, and an accounting orientation. So this person, if you look at your whole management staff in a large HR office, this person's a little different than the others. And where do we get these people? Interesting. We get them from the accounting office if we're looking internally, and we don't look. They look at us. And why do they come to us? Not because they hate their office, not because they're poorly managed or anything. They're people that have that same need we talked about way in the beginning of being in a helping profession. And so you have an accountant who gets a thrill out of helping other people. And in my experience, it's internally, it's been a talented accountant, or people that are associated with compensation-oriented vendors, like insurance companies and things of that sort. So they're very detail-oriented people, and their job is very, very cut and dry. And of course, that sub-strategy, just like training, just like recruitment and selection, that sub-strategy feeds into the overall HR strategy. And it has to be executed in accordance with that strategic plan. And another person whose domain falls in this category is called the employee relations manager, which we talked about already. And the employee relations manager is skilled in the area of applied psychology, counseling, human counseling, and has to be skilled in operations management, so that he or she can identify what complaints are all about. So the employee relations manager, you remember I told you that that's a person who deals in complaints. That's the complaint department, if you will. And all of these are oversimplifications, but you get my point. And of course, that's very emotionally draining. But these are people who are people who just enjoy solving problems for other people. And so the value of the employee relations manager is that that person is a diagnostician in the sense that he or she brings forward areas, pockets of managerial problems. And a problem in that case is defined as an individual who lacks or chooses not to employ the abilities associated with a professional manager. In other words, it's unprofessional management. Over time, that person will see patterns that will identify those types of problems. Once a problem is identified, it's not the job of the employment relations manager to solve those problems, to conduct an intervention, with the exception of small interventions, like I spoke to you before about a room service scenario, for instance. Once the problem is identified, once the employee relations manager identifies that problem now becomes the job of the director. Why? Because the employee relations manager doesn't have the clout to solve management problems, management behavioral problems. The director has the clout because he or she is an executive. They're at the executive level, and he or she has the powers that are associated with that level, and he or she will notify the parallel executive, food and beverage department, recreation department, rooms department, whatever, and share with that person that he or she is planning on further investigation for diagnosis of a problem known as unprofessional management, and seek the collaboration of that person, that division head, to assist in the intervention. And when that happens, we have solved segmented problems having to do with unprofessional management. And when that happens, we are enhancing our opportunities to retain the employees we've acquired. You may remember I mentioned HR, marketing and sales is the acquisition and maintenance of guests, and HR is the acquisition and maintenance of human capital. And if we acquire human capital, but we don't employ strategies to retain those people, i.e. professional management, then we've wasted our dollars. We've wasted the dollars of the organization. What happens when that occurs? When that occurs, I gave you a scenario in the introduction section of this chapter. When that happens, you have fallout. You have what we call employee turnover. And it's negative employee turnover. Voluntary and involuntary turnover are good things if they occur for the right reasons. But If the talented people are leaving the organization, then that's a symptom of a problem. And there's an old saying that goes, people don't quit jobs, people quit other people. And the inference there is that they quit the person who is in charge of them because of some perception of treatment. So think about this from a macro view, from a big picture view. So let's say an organization is spending appropriate resource dollars for recruitment and selection, doing the same thing with training and development, and finds that the people, once all these dollars have been expended, people leave. They leave the organization, they go to the competition. And then the ones that come in turn out to be mediocre at best. And why is that? Well, it's a phenomenon that I've witnessed for years and years and years, and it's particularly strong today. It's the word on the street. It's your reputation. This industry is all about our reputation. If somebody wants to ask me about the time the same guy got fired twice in two different coasts of the country, I'll share that with you, which demonstrates that it's a very small industry that we work in, and your reputation is everything. So what happens is people leave the company, people decide to have catharses and share their information via a social network, and human nature being what it is, other individuals will read it, believe it, they'll chime in with, let me tell you my story, and then the next one says, well, you think that's bad? And next thing you know, everybody in town believes that perception of your organization. In reality, what happens too, when people do switch and go to work for the competitor, 9 times out of 10 they regret the decision and they realize it was better before. But still, if that perception, if that is existent, if we're ending up with mediocre employees, then something is wrong in the retention area. Assuming that we recruit and select appropriately, and that we train appropriately, they come to work for us, we've invested all that money, and now they go and leave us in substantial numbers, and the best we can bring in to replace them is mediocre, we've got a big problem. Well, what happens here? What happens here is the GM, who's an operator, they don't think, proactively until we teach them how. So GM is going to say, well, why are we spending all this money in recruitment and selection and training just to get these mediocre people? Why are we hiring and training people to go to work for our competitors? And so the result of that, then, and now let's, especially if it's now the shareholders are not happy because your product is mediocre, your ADR starts to drop, your RevPAR starts to drop, talking about lodging properties, your productivity is not as efficient and effective, and so now you're making less of a profit margin on what is left, and the shareholders go up in arms. What's going on here? My shares are falling in price. And what do? And now the controller steps in to the GM's rescue, and they eliminate the training department. They get rid of the HR people. They hire substandard HR practitioners at lower salaries, and the controller, proudly proclaims to the shareholders, I've cut our human resources expenses in half. The costs have been cut in half. And then what happens then? The spiral continues, and the service gets worse, and the profits get lower, and the revenues keep dropping. And when the first proclamation was made to the shareholders, the controller and the GM got big bonuses, 40% bonuses. And the next year they get fired because the place isn't performing. New people come in, and if they don't fix it, next year they get fired. And so that's the spiral. And that's what strategic management is all about. Seeing the big picture, being systemic. So, retention is a crucial issue. In the book, we tell you that it's, obviously labor is one of the major expenses in the hospitality industry. In many cases, it's as much as 50% of the total expenses for an organization. And the cost of turnover, which we've discussed already, is very high, and replacing turnover positions is very expensive, and talent, KSAAs, talent in the labor market is a supply and demand issue, and once our reputation causes people to cease seeking employment with us, and those who were with us badmouth us, then that spiral begins, and it goes down and down and down. And I'll bet you've seen this happen to organizations, maybe not in the detail I'm describing for you. So you got this compensation administrator, and they're very left-brain people. God bless them, they stay with you forever. They're very proficient at what they do. They're not really at all involved with the other things we do, but they like being part of that, helping professional team. And they dabble. All the ones I've had, they dabble. They dabble in counseling, and they don't have the training for it, but they're, but they like the environment, and that's what brings them in, which is what attracts people to hospitality in the beginning. So we walk through all the compensation practices. You have direct compensation and indirect compensation. You have benefits, which are indirect compensation. You have pay, which is direct compensation. You have perks, usually at the executive level, but at any level, for instance, theme parks and those kinds of things, free admission, lodging, properties, professional rates, employee rates. Those are perks. Those are perquisites. And the other thing that the compensation analyst gets trained in is the legal aspect of compensation, because like everything, you can see the thread, right? The legal thread winding through everything we do, and they're trained in that for the purpose of ensuring legal compliance with our compensation practices. Because if we are not in compliance, and if the agency technocrats here are called the Department of Labor, specifically the Wage and Hour Division. If we are not in compliance by their standards, we are in for a lot of financial heartache. And I can't tell you how many times I've seen audits cause large companies lots and lots of money. And the key law that we talk about, the federal law, is the FLSA. It's the Fair Labor Standards Act. It was established back in 1938. And it identifies the rules for compensation, for overtime provisions, and for child labor laws. And there was a time that the FLSA, which establishes the minimum wage, the acceptable minimum wage on a federal level. And as you know, the states can establish their own minimum wage. It can't be less than the federal, but if it's higher, then the state law prevails. And in some states, and this is the reason that the topic of your sample paper was selected, in some states, this has had a major impact on organizations, labor-intensive organizations, and so and virtually every state now. In the past, we didn't have a lot of state minimum wages. But today, the majority of states now have their own minimum wages, and it does exceed that of the Fed. And the other issue with compensation practices is security issues. And there are open systems, closed systems, and the book tells you all about the specifics of that. As I said, very, very straightforward stuff. And another thing about benefits to remember is there are mandatory benefits and there are voluntary benefits. There are benefits that the law mandates that the employer provide, workers' comp, unemployment comp, Social Security, COBRA, FMLA, Family Medical Leave Act. Those are mandatory. Organization must provide those. And then I gave you a picture in the book that lists a much longer list of voluntary benefits that are very, very commonly provided in our industry. So another factor, and this is beyond the scope of the compensation administrator, and it's really more in the realm of the employee relations manager. Another factor is the insurance that the organization provides a safe working environment. And because that's a cause of turnover. If somebody gets hurt, they're out of work. They're out of work. It's not their fault. It's our fault sometimes. And but it's still turnover. And it's not positive turnover. It's negative turnover. So safety programs, of course, are very important, as you've seen. And the field of risk management is a specialized form of training. In my experience, we always trained the security department, the loss prevention department, on those issues. And when I got to a point in my career, my last executive job, I was a VP, and the security department, the loss prevention department, fell under us, which is a perfect blend because even prior to that, we had a very, very close working relationship with the security department. And so, as you read through it, it's all very, very straightforward stuff. Now, we had a question last week, and I want to go back to the last chapter, which was on training and development. And we talked about needs analysis, and one of our participants said, well, I've never seen this, I've never participated in it, and you told us what it is, but how do you do it? Give me an example of how you do it. Very good question. So let me walk you through very quickly. We're almost out of time. Remember that we discussed that an organizational problem is usually a symptom. And the symptoms or symptom, once we analyze it and dig deep, we mine it, we data mine it, we identify the root real problem. And that real problem is always in one, but sometimes two, and sometimes all three very simplified categories. It's either a material resource problem, it's a people problem, or it's a systems problem. And you heard me say most of them are systems problems. So think back to the vignette. The vignette talked about a training manager, skitsy about losing his job, as all of them are, goes and conducts a needs analysis with a front desk. So how does he really do that? What he does is he contacts the AGM, the assistant general manager, or the rooms division manager, or the resident manager, same jobs. Those people, whichever one you have, you don't have all three, whichever one you have, that person is primarily responsible for rooms division. Rooms division is the division that the front desk falls under, and the whole front office and the front desk under that. And so this person would contact that person, identify, say, I'm here to help. I'm here to help you solve a problem. And in this case, remember, it was a GSA problem. And the GSA problem was all about check-ins and check-outs. And so the training manager now wants to identify, do we have a training problem? Do we have a learning gap? Do we have a gap between what people know how to do and can do and the standard? And you recall it was the ending in this case, as in many cases, it was a systems problem. They implemented computer system that used to take 3 steps, and the new system took 9 steps, and why was it implemented? For convenience of reporting to the accounting office. So what if that wasn't the case? Or how did the guy, the training guy, do this? And so he goes to the rooms division person, and then the rooms division person says to the front office manager, you know, this guy's going to help us out. And this person, of course, has to be well versed in the operation so that he or she knows what they're looking for, and observes with a checklist, and knowing that the frame is those 3 things: systems, resources, and people. And so let's say that the problem wasn't the system itself. Let's say the problem was they bought a new system, and the system was potentially just as efficient as the last system, but the people were clumsy when they tried to use it. Well, you have a learning gap. It's a skills learning gap. Apparently, people need to be sufficiently trained on this new system. And when that happens, that will solve the problem of poor guest service index scores in that specific area for those specific functions. You can have people problems that aren't learning problems or learning gaps or training problems, but you know, in this case, that would be a training problem, a learning gap, and then the solution is now within the domain of the training manager. As we spoke in the last chapter, if it's not within that domain, then it goes into another category. In this case, in the case that other scenario, it would go to the controller, because the controller made a mistake. He or she purchased a clumsy system. He or she, in our new scenario, purchases a good system. We identify it. You know, we say, you know, and we do this through 2 things: observation and interviews, interaction. Not fancy interviews, informal interviews. Actually, you talk to them while they're doing another task, not one of the guests, of course, but while they're doing another task, because then they're going to flip first things that come to their minds. And you analyze that. And so, in this particular case, the training problem would be a program to teach the new system, the good system, not the bad one, the good system, to the front desk agents. And then what happens, the training manager goes ahead and does the design, the development, the implementation, the evaluation, and of course the reinforcement. So that's just to answer the question. You know, how do you do this? That's how you do it. We're way out of time, I know. So if this clip gets posted, I'll see you in the next clip.